Jorge Mario Bergoglio is his name. He's the former Archbishop of Buenos Aires. He's the first pontiff from the Americas, first Jesuit pope, first non-European in almost 1,300 years.
Just a day after the world mourned the passing of Pope Francis, shocking details have begun to surface. Details that were not mentioned in the Vatican's initial statements.
With immense gratitude for his example as a true disciple of the Lord Jesus, we commend the soul of Pope Francis to the infinite, merciful love.
Could there be more to the story than we were told?
This morning, as worshipers across the world begin their Easter celebrations in Vatican City, crowds filling St. Peter's Square for Easter Mass.
Join us as we take a closer look at the disturbing details revealed in Pope Francis's autopsy and what they mean. Humble beginnings. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the man the world would later know as Pope Francis, was born on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He was the first of 5 children in a close-knit family. His parents, Mario Jose Bergoglio and Regina Maria Sivori, were Italian immigrants. His father worked as an accountant at the railways, and his mother was a homemaker. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood gave young Jorge a strong connection to everyday people. He saw how hard his parents worked and how they lived modestly. This stayed with him for life. He often spoke about the importance of staying close to the people and never forgetting where you come from. He didn't live in luxury, and he didn't chase comfort. Instead, he grew up understanding the value of humility and service. His roots in Argentina, with its mix of cultures, struggles, and hopes, helped form his open and compassionate worldview. Jorge was a curious and thoughtful student. He attended a technical secondary school and graduated with a diploma in chemistry. For a time, it seemed like he might follow a career in science, but something deeper was calling him. At the age of 21, after a time of personal reflection and spiritual searching, he decided to join the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits. This was a big decision. The Jesuits are known for their deep focus on education, missionary work, and commitment to justice. Jorge felt drawn to this path because it allowed him to serve others, especially the poor and forgotten. One important event that changed his life happened when he was young. He suffered a severe illness and had part of one lung removed due to a serious infection. This health scare made him reflect deeply on life, fragility, and faith. It also made him more empathetic to those who suffer. He learned early on that life is not always easy, but it can be full of meaning when lived for others. Later, as a Jesuit priest in Argentina during the country's dark period known as the Dirty War in the 1970s, Bergoglio faced very difficult choices. The military dictatorship at the time was responsible for widespread human rights abuses, including torture, kidnappings, and killings. He tried to protect others as best he could, sometimes quietly, sometimes behind the scenes. This period was painful and left a lasting mark on him. It taught him about courage, silence, and the limits of power. It also helped him see how the church should always stand with the oppressed, not the powerful. Next up, how he rose through the church to become pope and why nobody saw it coming. The path to the papacy. After joining the Society of Jesus in 1958, Jorge Mario Bergoglio began a journey that would slowly take him to the highest position in the Catholic Church. His early years in the Jesuit order were spent studying philosophy and theology. He was ordained as a priest in 1969 and quickly showed strong leadership skills. In 1973, at just 36 years old, he was named Provincial Superior of the Jesuits in Argentina. This meant he was in charge of the entire Jesuit community in the country. At a time when Argentina was going through serious political problems, including the brutal military dictatorship known as the Dirty War, Bergoglio led with quiet strength. He tried to guide his priests safely while also staying faithful to the Church's mission to serve and protect the poor. His leadership style was calm, careful, and deeply rooted in prayer and humility. After serving the Jesuits, Bergoglio moved into more public roles within the church. In 1992, he was made Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires, and just 5 years later he became Archbishop of Buenos Aires. This made him the top Catholic leader in Argentina's capital, one of the most important and visible roles in the country's church. As Archbishop, he stood out for his simple lifestyle. He lived in a small apartment instead of the fancy bishop's palace. He refused to have a driver and instead took the bus and subway to work. He cooked his own meals and avoided expensive clothing. These choices were not for show. They came from his belief that church leaders should live like the people they serve. When asked by a reporter about gay priests in the church, he responded, "If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" This simple sentence made headlines around the world. It marked a major shift in how the papacy talked about LGBTQ+ people. In the past, church leaders often used more judgmental or harsh language, but Pope Francis chose words of openness and understanding. While he didn't change official church teaching, Catholic doctrine still says that homosexual acts are sinful, though being gay is not a sin. He sent a clear message: LGBTQ+ people deserve respect, dignity, and a place in the church. This softer tone continued throughout his papacy. Over time, Pope Francis showed increasing support for civil unions for same-sex couples. In a 2020 documentary, he said, "Homosexual people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God." He added that what was needed was a civil union law to protect their rights legally. These comments were historic. No pope had ever publicly supported civil unions before. Although the Vatican later clarified that these were his personal views and not official church teaching, it still signaled a major cultural shift.
Pope Francis, his railing against church excesses have made him millions of fans among the faithful.
In terms of language, Pope Francis also made efforts to be more inclusive. He encouraged church leaders to avoid harsh or exclusionary words when talking about LGBTQ+ people. He emphasized the need to listen, to welcome, and to walk alongside people rather than shut them out. This more pastoral approach helped many LGBTQ+ Catholics feel seen and heard, even if they still face limits within church rules. However, just as with LGBTQ+ inclusion, Pope Francis's approach to women in the church was both hopeful and frustrating for many. He regularly spoke about the need to give women more roles in the church. He said that women's voices must be heard more often and that the church needed their wisdom and leadership. He appointed more women to high positions in the Vatican than any pope before him. For example, he named women to key roles in the Synod of Bishops and the Dicastery for Bishops, which are influential groups in church decision-making. He also opened the door for women to officially serve as lectors and acolytes, roles in Catholic Mass that had traditionally been reserved for men. In 2021, he issued a decree that formally allowed women to be installed in these ministries, something many Catholics had long hoped to see. Still, Pope Francis drew a firm line when it came to ordaining women as priests. He said several times that the Church's teaching on this issue was final. According to him, Pope John Paul II had already settled it in the 1990s, stating that the Church had no authority to ordain women. Francis repeated that belief, saying that while women could and should lead in many areas, the priesthood would remain limited to men. This position disappointed many Catholics, especially in places like Europe and North America, where calls for female priests have grown louder over the years. Critics said that his actions didn't always match his words. They appreciated the changes he made, but felt that he stopped short of true equality. That's the main tension that marked Pope Francis's approach to both LGBTQ+ rights and the role of women. On one hand, he brought a more caring and respectful tone. He met with transgender people, supported same-sex couples in private conversations, and praised women for their strength and leadership. On the other hand, the rules of the Church remained largely the same. He often spoke of mercy and inclusion, but he did not rewrite doctrine. For some, his approach was brave and realistic. For others, it was not enough. Still, he opened space for dialogue, which had been missing for a long time. He gave people hope that the Church could be both faithful to its teachings and open to change. Global diplomacy and climate advocacy. Pope Francis is not just a religious leader. Over the years, he became a powerful global voice on major political, social, and environmental issues. He often used his position to call for peace, fairness, and care for the planet. While he never acted like a politician, his influence in world affairs was undeniable. One of his most important contributions came in 2015, when he published an encyclical called Laudato Si. This is a formal letter from the Pope to the Church and the world. In this case, it focused on the environment and climate change. Francis made it clear that protecting the planet is a moral responsibility, especially because environmental destruction often hurts the poor the most. He urged people, governments, and businesses to change how they treat nature. He called for reducing waste, cutting pollution, and ending the overuse of natural resources. Laudato Si was historic because it connected faith with science. Francis didn't deny the science of climate change. He embraced it. He said the Earth is our common home and warned that the damage we do to nature also damages human life. His message reached far beyond the Catholic Church. Environmental groups, scientists, and leaders from many countries praised his strong support for action on climate change. Pope Francis also made a big impact in diplomacy. He played a quiet but important role in helping the United States and Cuba restore diplomatic relations in 2014. For over 50 years, the two countries had been at odds, but Francis helped build trust between them. Letters from the Pope and meetings at the Vatican helped both sides move toward agreement. In the Middle East, Francis called for peace and dialogue between religions, especially between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. He visited places like Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and Palestine to promote understanding and respect. These trips were risky but showed his commitment to peace. He also became a strong voice for refugees and migrants, especially during the European refugee crisis.
So on the EU's to increasing numbers of people seeking refuge in the bloc, any time in the last 7 years.
He asked countries to welcome those fleeing war and poverty, reminding people that behind every statistic is a real human life. As nationalism and populist politics rose in many parts of the world, Pope Francis often stood as a different kind of leader.
Francis is the first pope from the Americas, has dedicated his life and ministry to the poor.
He warned against fear-based politics, hate speech, and the rejection of the vulnerable. He reminded people of the values of mercy, dignity, and justice. He didn't name specific politicians, but his messages were often seen as a challenge to leaders who promoted division over unity. Now we'll dive into how Pope Francis took on one of the Church's darkest scandals and the tough road to accountability. The weight of scandal. One of the most painful and serious issues that Pope Francis had to face during his time as Pope was the global crisis of abuse within the Catholic Church. For decades, priests in different parts of the world had been accused of abusing children and young people, and in many cases, bishops and church officials were found to have covered up these crimes. This scandal caused deep harm, not only to the victims and their families, but also to the Church's reputation and trust among Catholics everywhere.
For centuries, the Catholic Church has been the biggest and at times most powerful institution the world has ever seen.
By the time Francis became Pope in 2013, the crisis had already been exposed in countries like the United States, Ireland, Australia, Germany, and others.
Of the extraordinary effect Pope Francis is having on the Catholic world.
The Church had made some efforts to respond, but many survivors and critics believed those steps were not enough. People wanted real accountability and justice, not just apologies. At first, Pope Francis struggled with this issue. In the early years of his papacy, he made statements that seemed to support accused bishops before hearing the full truth. One of the most talked about examples was in Chile. In 2018, Francis visited the country and strongly defended Bishop Juan Barros, who had been accused of covering up abuse committed by the notorious priest Fernando Karadima. Survivors and activists were shocked and deeply hurt by the Pope's response. Francis even accused them of spreading calumny or false accusations. This led to a major backlash. Under growing pressure, Francis sent investigators to Chile. After reading their report, he admitted he had made mistakes. He said he had received wrong information and later invited victims to the Vatican to listen to their stories personally. In a rare and powerful move, all 34 Chilean bishops offered their resignations and several were later removed from office. Another major scandal happened in the United States involving former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. He was one of the most powerful church leaders in the country, but was found to have sexually abused seminarians and minors over many years.
Of Washington is pleading not guilty this morning to child sex abuse charge. McCarrick was stripped of his rank as a cardinal and removed from the priesthood after the Vatican confirmed other allegations of abuse.
What shocked people even more was that church officials had known about his behavior and allowed him to rise through the ranks anyway. In 2019, Pope Francis defrocked McCarrick, removing him from the priesthood entirely, the most severe penalty the church can give. It was the first time a cardinal had ever been punished this way for sexual abuse. Realizing stronger rules were needed, Francis took a big step in 2019 by issuing a new law called "You Are the Light of the World." This law required every diocese around the world to set up systems for reporting abuse and cover-ups. It made it clear that not just priests, but bishops and other church leaders could also be investigated and held responsible. It also allowed lay people, including non-clergy experts, to take part in investigations. For many, this was a major turning point, showing that Francis was serious about reform. Still, progress was not always smooth. Inside the Vatican, some officials resisted these changes. There were delays in investigations and reports of secrecy. Survivors often said that while the Pope's words were welcome, the Church still acted too slowly and protected its own leaders too much. Some pointed out that even with new laws, very few bishops were actually removed or punished. Francis's approach was seen as a mixture of strong action and occasional hesitation. He did more than any pope before him to deal with abuse, but he was also criticized for not going far enough. Survivors appreciated when he listened to them and met with them, but they also wanted more direct involvement in shaping church policy. They wanted transparency, faster response, and a clear end to a culture of silence. For Pope Francis, the abuse crisis was not only a legal issue, it was a moral and spiritual failure. He often spoke about how the Church must do penance, seek forgiveness, and never repeat the same mistakes. He said that abuse was a kind of sacrilege, and that those who committed it betrayed the very mission of the Church. By the later years of his papacy, the Church had made important changes. Reporting systems were more available, church trials were more active, and some high-level leaders were removed. But for many survivors, healing would take much longer. They reminded the world that justice isn't just about rules. It's about real change and respect for human dignity. Struggles behind the scenes. As Pope Francis continued his papacy into his later years, questions about his health became more common. He was already 76 when he became pope in 2013, and with time, physical challenges began to affect his daily life. One of his longest-standing health problems is chronic sciatica, a painful nerve condition that causes discomfort in the lower back, hips, and legs. He has spoken openly about this condition, even canceling events at times when the pain became too severe. In July 2021, Francis underwent major surgery on his colon.
Pope Francis is in a Rome hospital tonight after undergoing intestinal surgery.
The procedure was to treat a condition called diverticulitis, which causes inflammation in the intestinal walls. The surgery lasted several hours and required him to stay in the hospital for more than a week. Afterward, he made a strong recovery and returned to his public duties. But it reminded people around the world that even popes are not immune to aging and illness. Over time, Francis also began to experience more visible mobility issues. He started using a wheelchair for long distances and often needed assistance when standing or walking. At times, he leaned heavily on a cane. These signs led to growing speculation that he might follow the example of his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who shocked the world by resigning in 2013 due to health concerns. Francis didn't ignore the rumors. He admitted in interviews that resignation is always a possibility if his health makes it impossible to lead the Church properly.
Pope Francis says that he is not considering resigning, that he is recovering well from his colon operation, and that his doctors are no longer require him to follow a diet.
However, he also made it clear that, for now, he was still capable of doing the job and had no immediate plans to step down. He said he saw the papacy as a responsibility, not a privilege, and that he would continue as long as he felt he could serve effectively. Despite his physical challenges, Pope Francis stayed incredibly active. He continued traveling to countries around the world, including visits to Iraq, South Sudan, Mongolia, and Canada, all after his surgery. He delivered powerful speeches, led global church meetings, and pushed forward reforms on financial transparency, synodality, and environmental responsibility. His body may have slowed down, but his leadership remained strong. The final day and cause of death. Pope Francis passed away on Easter Monday, April 21, 2025, at 7:35 a.m. local time in the Vatican. His death came just weeks after a serious and extended struggle with respiratory illness, ending a papacy that lasted more than 12 years. At the age of 88, he was the oldest reigning pope in nearly a century to die while still in office. The story of his final illness began on February 6th, when the Vatican announced that the pope was suffering from bronchitis.
The Vatican has not said when Francis will be discharged, but his hospitalization renews concerns over his long-term health and his capacity to continue leading the Catholic Church.
At the time, he had already canceled several scheduled events and was reportedly having trouble breathing and speaking. As his condition worsened, he was hospitalized on February 14th at Rome's Gemelli Hospital, where doctors soon diagnosed him with bilateral pneumonia.
Gemelli Hospital in Rome. He was first hospitalized on the 14th of February for bronchitis and is now being treated for double pneumonia,
a severe infection affecting both lungs. His health crisis became more serious during his hospital stay. On February 28th, he experienced what was described as his worst night. That evening, Pope Francis suffered multiple episodes of acute respiratory insufficiency. Doctors had to perform several bronchoscopies, procedures to clear his airways due to bronchospasms, which are similar to asthma attacks. He was also diagnosed with a polymicrobial infection and mild kidney insufficiency, further complicating his fragile condition. According to Dr. Sergio Alfieri, one of his treating physicians, doctors even considered halting treatment at one point to let the Pope pass peacefully. However, Francis remained conscious and involved in his care and recovery, showing the quiet strength that had marked his leadership. After 38 days in the hospital, Pope Francis was discharged on March 23rd. He returned to his residence at Casa Santa Marta inside the Vatican, where he continued his recovery in private. Upon his release, he made a brief appearance from a hospital balcony in his wheelchair, offering a blessing and words of gratitude to the 3,000 people who had gathered below.
From the balcony of Rome's Gemelli Hospital, it was a long-awaited hello. A sigh of relief. Thank you to everyone, the Pope said, with a frail voice.
Despite his worsening condition, Francis made one last public appearance on Easter Sunday, April 20th. In a touching and symbolic moment, he appeared before thousands of Catholics in St. Peter's Square. Riding in the Pope mobile and seated in a raised chair, he smiled and waved as the crowd chanted, "Viva il Papa!" It was a final gift to the faithful, his way of being with them one last time on the holiest day of the Christian calendar. Just one day later, on the morning of April 21st, Pope Francis died peacefully in his Vatican residence. Though the Vatican has not officially confirmed a precise cause of death, it is believed that complications from pneumonia and respiratory failure led to his passing. The news of his death spread quickly across Rome and the world.
Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. According to a statement by the Vatican, he passed away at 7:35 a.m. local time.
Bells rang in St. Peter's Basilica as crowds gathered in silence and prayer. Many were tearful, lighting candles and holding photos of the man they had come to love as a humble, kind, and deeply human pope. From the grand halls of the Vatican to churches and city streets around the world, a deep sense of mourning was felt. If you found this look into the death of Pope Francis meaningful, make sure to give it a like. Leave your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more interesting stories like this.